Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eustace Mashimbia, and I'm the facilitator for today's program. On a day-to-day basis, I'm the CEO of Proudly South African. But for the purposes of today's session, I will be facilitating the discussions and will help take you as the delegates who have joined us today through the conversations that our panelists will be having with us. The purpose of today's program is to really take you as the youth of this country, as entrepreneurs in this country, through the offerings that are available, especially insofar as the agro-processing industry is concerned. So please take in what will be conveyed to you today. Be a sponge, absorb as much as you can, take down the details that will be shared with you, apply for whatever offerings and programs that will be discussed today, and ensure that you get your business back on a proper footing. First things first, before we get into the program, which is not long, our program is really not long. We only have 3 speakers who are going to take you through a few presentations, a few minutes each. We don't want long-winded presentations because we want to reserve the bulk of the time for questions that you will have for our speakers. We want you to utilize the Q&A tab that you have on your systems to send all the questions, even as the speakers go through their presentations. Jot down all the questions. We will note all of them. We will have a Q&A where we can then try and address as much as of the questions that we will have received as possible. Ideally, all the questions that we will receive today should be responded to by our panelists, a panel of experts who are going to take you through different programs and offerings that they are each responsible for within the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. We have a few things that we also want to highlight for those of you who might prefer to view this on live stream platforms. We are streaming the event live on YouTube. Please go on to the Proudly SA page on YouTube if you feel that that is where you will best have the best experience when watching it there. But the disadvantage with that is that you will not be able to send through your Q&As. So this platform is still the best one for you to send your Q&As, your questions, so that we can answer each of them. On Twitter at Proudly SA, we will stream it live. Also on Facebook at Proudly South African. And we just want you to please share those handles with as many people as possible. Our social media guys are out there, both the Proudly SA and the DTIC social media teams are putting the information out there for the public to also follow the conversations. The benefit you have by being on this call is that you are able to then directly send us your questions. We'll monitor both the chat as well as the Q&A tab on the platform. Without taking up too much of your time, I'm going to ask the first presenter to come on board. But before they do that, I want to give a sense as to why this is important and why those of you who are not necessarily sure why you are on this call to understand the importance of this. The country battles high levels of youth unemployment, and this being Youth Month. In fact, the president spoke about it yesterday. The fact that if you look at the youth, which are people generally between the ages of 15 and 34, about 46% of them remain unemployed. And about 9.3% of our graduates who fall within that youth category also remain unemployed. And so it is important that we catch up to the trends that are happening in developed economies, where the bulk of jobs are created by entrepreneurs, by youth entrepreneurs, by young entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs should not just see themselves as people who will go through, the schooling system and just fend for themselves. Entrepreneurs are those who are brave enough to can go out and can be employers, and that's what we're looking for today. With today's session, we want to encourage those of you who are already entrepreneurs to continue with your journey of entrepreneurship and to provide as much support as we can to you. But for those of you who are not necessarily entrepreneurs but want to venture into this journey, we want more of you to come on board. We want more of you to succeed, because then the jobs will then come from your individual enterprises and individual businesses. And that is the catching up that I'm talking about, because in developed economies, at least 90% of jobs and contribution to the GDP comes from SMMEs. Small, medium, micro enterprises are the ones that are the source of employment. They don't look to government for jobs. They look to government for policies that will help create an environment that will enable them to thrive as entrepreneurs. And that's what we're trying to achieve with this session. So I'm going to call upon the first speaker, who's going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes or so with you guys, taking us through the offerings that they have. This is Mr. Soli Mulepo, who's the Deputy Director for Agro-Processing at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Mr. Mulepo, please, the stage is yours. Take us through your offerings. And later on, I will then, when we have our Q&As, I'll facilitate that you respond to the questions that our audiences and delegates that have joined us today will have for you. So thank you to everyone who has joined us. The first presentation is from Mr. Soli Mulepo.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Mr. Machinde. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, more especially our important guests, which are the youth of 2021. We really welcome you on board. I'm Soli Mulepo, as they've already alluded. I hope you can all see my slides. So I'm a Deputy Director in the Agro-Processing Sector Desk of the DTIC. I'm falling under the division, we call it Industrial Competitiveness and Growth. So the division is mainly aimed to drive the manufacturing sector of the country. So within the division, you'll find the sector desk that drives the economy. So agro-processing is one of them. We find the automotives, plastics. You find most of the sector desks that are there to drive. So today I've been tasked to actually paint the picture in terms of the agro-processing sector overview in the country. So I'm going to take you through various pointers. And as you know that when you talk about agro-processing, it's actually the subsector of manufacturing that is actually subdivided into 11 categories. So my specialization, or where exactly I'm focusing, is mostly on food and beverages. So I'm going to take you through my slides. So this is, in a nutshell, the background of the presentation, where I'll paint a picture in terms of the overall facts, in terms of agriculture and agro-processing. As we know that agriculture draws its raw materials. Agro-processing, draws its raw materials from agriculture. So these sectors are intertwined. So you cannot talk agro-processing without agriculture, because in terms of raw materials, you need agriculture. So, and we also have to talk about the innovations and technology that will attract the youth participation in the agro-processing. Then we talk about the top traded commodities. In terms of the top traded commodities, it's actually to share with you the opportunities where you can venture, because it's not all of you who should go into the normal, employment stream. Some should, you are meant to be the employers. You are meant to create those jobs. So you have to know where are the opportunities. So in a nutshell, I will say that South Africa is actually the world's 24th most populous country, with the number of young people expected to grow to around 39 million in 2030. And as our program director already alluded, unemployment rate for youth tend to be significantly higher than the rest of the population. However, there are less youth participating in agriculture and agro-processing. So this sector is an opportunity for you, because I can tell you that there are less participation of youth in agriculture and agro-processing sectors. So as you know that in our National Development Plan, the NDP, the sector is expected to create direct jobs, which you find that 643,000 is a direct jobs, and then that is in agriculture and agro-processing. Also the 326 that will come from related industries. So related industries, I'm talking about the logistics, the packaging, the freight forwarding, the markets. So there are a lot of interrelated industries that triggers employment in both agriculture and agro-processing. And then starting with the contribution to the economy, in terms of the gross value added, agriculture and agro-processing sector made up 5.8% of all formal economic activities. And these two sectors, they contribute around 253 billion to the total South African economy of 4.5 trillion in the value added. So again, the agro-processing sector and food manufacturing made up of a significant share of 71% of the total value, followed by the beverages and tobacco. So again, in terms of employment, so when you look at the feeding sector, which is primary agriculture, it employs around 974,000 in terms of formal jobs. And then the agro-processing, it's at another 346,000. So this, they actually combined, they contribute 8% to the formal employment. And the country exported products valued at 1.3 trillion. So there will be my colleague who will be talking about the trade sphere of the country, where I think he will also tap into the contribution of agro-processing at large. And then in terms of the innovation and technologies that are there to attract the youth, you know that now we are actually into fourth industrial revolution. So the way of doing things, they tend to change now. So they are the game changers in terms of the technologies that are around. So we are now having an advantage of using robotics. So that is to enhance the productivity and also to gain the competitiveness edge. But knowing the circumstances and situations of South Africa, also that will also trigger more in terms of job creations, because we also need this, the innovators, the researchers, the technicians to actually come up and bring on board these technologies that will be used to enhance the agro-processing sector. So the issue of artificial intelligence, the 3D printing, so these are shaping the agro-processing to actually lower the cost and speed up the operations and also minimizing the errors. You know that in terms of manufacturing, you can use this technology to monitor your system, to look at the machines that are actually be able to produce and give you more volumes in a daily basis, so that you can be able to meet the domestic demand as well as the export demands. So in terms of the top traded agricultural commodities, you can see there that we are actually importing some of the commodities that we know that we don't have a competitive edge as a country in terms of producing them. It might be due to the climatic conditions, the soil science and all this. So you know that rice, we are the consumer of rice and we import rice. Poultry, I will touch on the master plans that the department is participating on or is driving. So we've got the poultry master plan. But you know that if you look at the figures, South Africa, we are the net importer of poultry, but there were some improvement in terms of building the capacity and also doing localization. Because what is important for youth to participate, for youth to be the entrepreneurs, is to actually participate on the localization drive, where we have to support the locally produced commodities. So you see those that we export, we can expand, and there's also an area where we have to look at the regions, the trade agreements that we have. So how do we better use those trade agreements? How do you better use those quotas that have been allocated to us? So you will see that there are commodities like citrus that are actually doing well in terms of the export market, but there are a lot more when we talk about the niche industries. So yeah, there are still an opportunities for you to actually dwell on those industries and contribute to increase the export base of the country. In terms of the percentage shares, you can see that in terms of exports, you can see the beverages, they are taking a toll. We've got the 33%, which majority of them are the wine. It's the wine industry. So it's an opportunity there for also youth to look at those opportunities that are there, and we can work together to expand those the piece of the pies to ensure that on those percentages you see, there are contributions from young people of our country to be the entrepreneurs and participate in those export opportunities. And then in terms of the employment, you can see there, I've already alluded before that agriculture actually employed around 861,000, and then agro-processing 554. So if you go down, you look at the food industry. So you look at the 310, the beverages and tobacco 773,000. So those are the breakdown in terms of what actually contributes to employment in the industry. And we want to see majority of youth participating there as the workers, as well as those that are actually creating those jobs. Because agro-processing is actually one of the sectors that has been pinpointed in the National Development Plan that it's got a potential of creating the jobs that the country needs. So, and most of them should come from the small businesses, the SMMEs, and as well as the youth and the women-owned businesses. When you zoom into the DTIC agro-processing sector desk, we've got three directorates there. That actually one that is dealing with the major or the matured agro-processing industries. So they are the one at the moment that are driving the poultry master plan. So the poultry master plan, which is aimed to actually support the poultry business in South Africa and ensure that we move on to actually the full capacity where the consumption of poultry can actually mainly come from our poultry industry in South Africa. So the main industry there is South African Poultry Association. So we also doing the poultry designation. In terms of designation, it's like is to work with the procurer of goods and services, in which we know that government is the most procurer of goods and services in terms of food. You know that the hospitals, the correctional services, the schools, they consume a poultry product. So it's an initiative where we push that this should be wholly localized. And then also the sugar master plan, and we've got the second directory there. It's a niche agro-processing. This one is supporting the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development in terms of coming up with the agriculture and agro-processing master plan, which is actually in progress. And we also have the industry here that we see it as a niche, and is still in the process of developing the cannabis industry. So the cannabis master plan, which has got a huge potential in terms of creating those jobs, assisting in terms of export drive. And we've got the supply development program for the localization. So now when you look at the third directorate is a forestry-based industry. This directorate, they are working on the furniture master plan. We know that a lot of SMMEs companies that are involved in the furniture industry. So we also look at they are looking into the forestry master plan and the enterprise development, as well as the furniture design competition, in which most of our youth that are in design, they participate in the furniture design. This is an annual event where the winners, they are going away with prizes in terms of coming with a new design for the furniture. And then the responsibilities of this the agro-processing sector desk is to actually understand the agro-processing institutional support system, align and build the capacity of key stakeholders across the three spheres of government, also support the matured as well as the niche industries, identify and facilitate the investment. So we work with other entities that are also specializing in investment and also supporting the entire value chain in terms of realizing those investments. And then also we facilitate the export potentials and also working on identifying new export markets, and then facilitate the strategic mega investments and then developing also the high potential food processing suppliers on a scale. So in this regard, there's a component of supply development program, which is, I know that also our sister department, small business development, agricultural and rural development, they are also working on that in terms of linking the farmers with the manufacturers, linking the farmers with the retailers. So this is a linkage where you are actually creating more suppliers, and we upscale them also for them to become, the manufacturers of the future. These are some of the policy levers that are actually a department we are working on. So we are looking at the food production chain or the agro-processing chain, actually from farm to the fork, where we assist in terms of financial and non-financial support. So one of my colleagues will be presenting on the financial incentives or financial instruments that the DTI is offering. But besides that, we've got a competition and regulation, which is also one of the policy lever that the department is having to ensure that it level the play field. Those that are practicing or they are doing the anti-competitive behaviors, they are dealt with. So I believe we all know the Competition Commission and Competition Tribunal. That is actually one of the agencies of the DTI, where it's actually implementing the competition in the country. And then we also have the industrial financing, which is not only the DTIC that is doing, but we have the developmental financial institution like the IDC, the Land Bank, National Empowerment Fund. So there are a lot of players. So our youth need to know about those the players in terms of industrial financing, because it's a challenge to move in an agro-processing business without getting the financial support. And I spoke about public procurement, trade, and the tariff. So you need to know the products and the customs duties or the tariff that are applicable in various regions and various countries. And the other issue is licensing and permitting. You know that in our sector, agro-processing, when you from the primary side and until you reach your consumers, there are licenses and permits that you need to comply and you need to acquire. For example, those that are in the farming space, you know that you need to have the water licenses. So you need to work with the Department of Water and Sanitation for the water licenses. The environmental impact assessments. When you export, the export permits. When you operate in the municipality, you need to have those the permits to do business in those. So you need to know all those permits. So we are available as the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition to assist you with those requirements. So those pillars are the pillars that are at our disposal. So we've got the research and development. We know that we've got the CSIR that are doing the research, the testing of the products, increasing the competitiveness of the product. We've got the South African Bureau of Standards, where they are putting the national standards that you need to comply with for your products to reach the shelves domestically and internationally, and as well as the international standards. So this is the pillars that they are there to assist you to actually tap into the market and create those jobs. And then it is important that our young people or the youth of today, they need to understand that when you talk about the agro-processing, you need to understand both the demand side and the supply side. So on the supply side is where you have to talk about, you have to understand the market requirements. So you have to work from back to actually front, where you have to understand what are the requirements of the market, what are the national standards that I need to comply with, and what are the private standards. You know that the markets, some of them, they have those private standards that you need to comply with. For example, the issue of hazard. So where you are, when you are actually working in a processing factory, processing lab, is that it's your facility complying with the food health requirements, working with, so understanding the issue of localization drive, so which is now is the issue of also sourcing the raw materials locally, which if you do that, if you are in agro-processing, you are also putting yourself in a better edge when it comes to accessing the support from the DTIC and from other agencies of government and private sector that are working on supporting you with financial resources. And then also on the demand side, you need to know what agreements are we having in place. Now we are actually on African free trade area, so you need to understand how does it work, what actually is expected from you, then also the other agreements that we are having with the European Union, and other regions. So need to understand that. So we've got the export help desk at the DTIC that you can come and then, or you can make a call or write an email to seek more information if you see that you are having a product that is export ready. And if you want to also be export ready, we have what you call export development, promotion, and outward investment within the DTIC that can also assist you to be export ready. And then I zoomed in onto the constraints and opportunities, because now for you to be able to realize growth in the sector, you need to understand the constraints. So some of these constraints are cross-cutting, so meaning they affect as many industries as possible. For example, high utility prices and inconsistent supply of electricity. We all know that we are all suffering load shedding. So it's one of the constraints now that the government is working on in terms of addressing such an issue, because it's a constraint and it's discouraging and it's even costly in terms of doing business. So it disrupts the manufacturing productivity. The issue of climate change. So we need to also be aware of climate change. It's a constraint and it's also an opportunity, because you can develop the climate smart products where they use less energy in terms, and also in terms of polluting the environment. So you minimize on this. And then the global pandemic as well, it's a challenge. We know that most of the SMMEs and the business that are owned by youth, they are on their knees now because of a global pandemic. So those are the constraints that they are facing, the business that are owned by the youth and the SMMEs, and even the bigger businesses are suffering on this one. So, but the government put aside the support packages. You know that the Department of Small Business Development, they were actually assisting in terms of providing those packages to the small businesses, the SMMEs, mostly that are owned by youth and women. And then security of raw materials. We know that now in terms of arable land, so we are competing for the arable land. So we know that there are development in other sectors like housing and all this. So they might be taking a bit or taking a toll on the raw materials. So this is also one of the challenges, and lack of continuous investment in plants. You know that we might be having an old plants or old machinery in the country. Those are some of the constraints that we picked, and also the imports that might become cheaply, or that they compete with the locally produced, and they even hamper the growth and the development of the imports. That's why there are those mechanisms in place to drive the localization. And we also have the opportunities there. So most of these constraints, they drive us into opportunities. Because localization, it gives you an opportunity to start working on those niche products, to start being the entrepreneur yourself, to start being contributing to the country's challenge of higher unemployment. And also now the concluded African continental free trade area, it gives an opportunity for you to access the African market, and then look at all other trade agreements and also the strategic partnerships. So look at those strategic partnerships. You need to know those strategic partnerships, that they exist, and also you as a young person, you can establish those partnerships, because we know that public-private partnership, it can actually lubricate economic growth and assist in terms of you being included in the mainstream economy. These are some of the industrial associations that we work with, and that are the mouthpiece of agriculture and agro-processing. So, for example, if you are participating in one of these commodities, I can encourage you to associate yourself with this industry association. So they are not limited to the ones that I've identified here. So there are many more industrial associations. So these are industrial associations. They actually serve as a mouthpiece to represent the producers, the processors in the area, and also they can access financial support from government that is there to make sure that this industrial association, they do more research, they develop the new exporters, they assist in taking their products to the market. So we've got a consumer goods council. This one deals with the manufacturers, the retailers, and so we've got the red meat. If you are in a red meat space, so there's a red meat producers organization, the fresh produce exporters forum. If you are in fruit, the Fruit South Africa, the South African Fruit and Vegetable Caners Association. So those are the industrial associations that they work closer with the DTI, and there are also more. So this one is just an example. So maybe don't say you actually forget mine. You didn't put mine there, but it's just an example. And then in conclusion, Chair, we're saying the master plan in agriculture and agro-processing will also assist in fast-tracking the youth access to resources and markets to promote their participation in agro-processing sector, which is including supporting procurement from business owned by the youth. As the master plan now is on the version 5, and it's actually identified youth entrepreneurship as one of the important aspects that the country should focus on. And then to promote investors that actively seek to integrate youth into this decision making, because youth, they shouldn't just be on the low tide of employment, but they should be there on the decision making, so that they are fully included in the economic emancipation of the country, and also support the establishment of youth producer groups that will have a greater bargaining power in the supply chain. Chair, I thank you very much. Those are my details. You can jot them down on the cell phone. I'm also on the WhatsApp. You can also, take me through on WhatsApp and social media. You'll find me. Thank you very much, Chair. I will be able to take the question on the later one.
Thank you. You know that there's more than 100 people on this call who have noted your WhatsApp details. So your WhatsApp will be buzzing. Thank you very much for that. Very insightful presentation. I also learned a lot myself, so I appreciate it. We have noted the questions on the chat box for you. When we get to the Q&A, Mr. Molapo, we will then deal with those. But thank you very much. Very insightful. I appreciate the time you've taken to prepare the presentation and to deliver it this morning. And for those who joined in later than when we started, one of the things that we should have mentioned is the fact that when we initially sent out the invitation, it was meant to be a youth in manufacturing session that focuses on two industries, agro-processing and pharmaceuticals. Unfortunately, due to some circumstances beyond our control, we could not rope in the expertise that we required for the pharmaceutical side of the discussion. And so the focus is purely on agro-processing for today. We will again convene a session that will focus on pharmaceuticals, and we will send out the invitation, and you can then join in if your interest is really in agro-processing. But there's no harm in staying for this session. Maybe if your interest is in pharmaceuticals, and there's no harm in you staying on for this session where we focus on agro-processing, because as you've noted from the previous presentation, there's quite a lot that is available to you as an entrepreneur, a lot that you can tap into, a lot of opportunities, but we'll deal extensively with that when we get to the Q&As. What I want to do now is to ask Mr. Donald Mabusela, who is the Director, Strategic Partnerships and Customer Care at the DTIC, to take our virtual podium, deliver his presentation. And please, as per the request made when the first speaker came on, note all your questions on the chat box. There's also a Q&A tab. Please note all your comments and your questions there. When we get to the Q&A session after the next two presenters have delivered their presentations or their introductory remarks, we will then deal with all those questions. Mr. Mabusela, the platform is yours. Please feel free to share your screen, to switch on your video, to unmute yourself, and to take the virtual podium. The stage is yours. Mr. Donald Mabusela, who's Director, Strategic Partnerships and Customer Care at the Department Trade, Industry and Competition. We seem to be battling a bit with Mr. Mabusela. What we'll do in the interest of time, whilst we sort out his technical difficulty, we are going to, please bear with us. These things happen. When you're on virtual platforms, these things happen. And whilst we sort out his technical difficulties, we're going to ask Mr. Joseph Senona, who was meant to talk after Mr. Mabusela, to kindly grace us with his presence and deliver his introductory remarks. He's the Chief Director, Export Promotion and Marketing at the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Mr. Senona, please do the honors whilst we sort out the technical difficulties that we seem to be having with Mr. Mabusela, which I hope we will be able to overcome. Is Mr. Senona ready and available?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Senona. The platform is yours.
Good morning, and thanks, Chairperson. Yeah, I think it would have made a lot of sense if I had come in, after Mr. Mabusela's presentation, for the simple reason that ours is really services that are geared towards, the last mile. If you're an entrepreneur or an exporter and you're looking for markets abroad, that's where we come in to assist. So it would have helped. But nevertheless, I do suspect that his presentation and my talk would somewhat complement each other in a way that assists everybody else who's on this particular call. So I come from a division called Export Development, Promotion and Outward Investment. Effectively, it's about taking care of the export value chain. So on the one hand, you're looking at the development of export capacity in its entirety. I think you will appreciate that for historical reasons, but partly because of the structure of our economy, you find that in the main, you don't have a lot of SMEs. Certainly, from what we have seen, you don't have a lot of youth-owned SMEs participating in the export markets. In fact, in one of the studies that was conducted about 5 years ago, it concluded that of the total exports of the country, in fact, almost 85% of those revolve around 5% of companies. So that means that our job is not only about getting the exports to the market abroad, but it's also about ensuring that we also diversify the exporters themselves, so the export base. So we want to see and ramp up the number of companies and quality companies, not just from a quantitative perspective. It's also from a qualitative perspective. We want to see as many youth-owned SMEs, participating in the export market in various sectors. Obviously, those sectors that are a priority for the country. This one specifically in terms of agro-processing is also very key, because it also tends to be labor intensive. As the chairperson was introducing this particular section, he made reference to the plight that we face as a country in terms of youth unemployment. And certainly when you look at that from the context of the youth primarily being the main component of our population, not only in South Africa, but across the continent as well, it makes sense to want to concentrate all our efforts and our interventions towards supporting the youth and the SMEs that are coming out. And in this particular instance, I do think that there is a lot of space for us to create opportunities to address unemployment, but also at the same time to ensure that we drive growth of the country through export-led activities, such as those that we see and we find within the agro-processing sector. After all, this is one of those sectors that at any given point, you can never argue that would ever run irrelevant. People have to eat at some point, and people develop different tastes at any given point. So I think there's always going to be opportunities. The question then becomes, how do we then make sure that we develop quality expertise and companies that are able to satisfy demand from different parts of the world in Africa as well as across the globe. Now, specifically in terms of our services, as I was indicating earlier on, that we come in really to assist with the last mile. And again, it's twofold. One is to ensure that we're able to capture our ability to supply, our supply capacity from an export perspective, which is why I really appreciate the presentation that was given by Mr. Molepo in terms of what are some of the interventions that we're doing and what are the sectors that we're beginning to drive competitiveness within the agro-processing sector. So that supply is very important, because that supply goes towards the demand that we see. Statistics indicate that the agro-processing sector in its entirety, in as far as its market value, is over $300 billion US. And of that $300 billion US, totally, South Africa only commands, at least in as far as our own GDP locally, close to about $2 billion US. So there is still massive opportunities, given the fact that a $300 billion industry, and for which there is massive opportunities for us to tap into, would definitely contribute to some of the objectives that we have within the country. So I think that's important, just to put it as a context, that it's not just the fact that we just want to pursue this. There are real opportunities that we see, and I think it boils down to the kind of interventions, it boils down to the kind of services and the enabling environment that we create. And so we do create that enabling environment. Number one is, obviously, as you know, South Africa is a globally integrated country. We maintain, a number of trade relations with a number of key strategic partners. Key to those are the trade agreements that we have. So one of the things that we are responsible for from our program is in terms of exploiting those trade agreements, because market access, on the one hand, you would put in specific agreements to tackle tariffs as well as non-tariff barriers. But at the end of the day, it's about whether or not your main stakeholders, that is the businesses, SMEs, the youth-owned businesses, are able to exploit the concessions as well as the advantages that have accrued as a result of the trade agreement. So one of the things that we do and the service that we offer is to obviously look at the trade agreement that we sign with multiple partners, but be able to exploit the opportunities that come out of them. One of the things that I also think that you will learn about probably when Mr. Mabusela does his presentation, in terms of some of the incentives that we provide, is about ensuring that of exploiting those opportunities is understanding, the real workings of the market itself. Segmentation of the market is often very important as part and parcel of your international expansion strategy. So one of the services that we have from the DTIC side is around primary market research. We've seen a whole lot of companies, make the critical mistake of wanting to just simply export without understanding the demands on the other side. There's one thing to talk about it broadly as a phenomenon, of advantage of seeing agro-processing is, there are advantages and opportunities to be derived out of there. But if you really want to go far, you ought to really understand, the clients that you're targeting and the countries that you're targeting, so that you increase your chances of success. So primary market research is very important, and it's a service that obviously exists within the DTIC. But as part and parcel of the primary market research, which is obviously an incentive that you can apply for within the DTIC, in terms of export readiness, again, it's very important that we never make that mistake to think that, and it's born out of experience. We have seen where we have taken companies to this last mile, to international exhibition space. We've taken them to different markets for them to campaign, to market their products. What we've seen is that when it comes to actually being really exporters, they struggle a little bit. One, because either they cannot meet the demand. Two, they cannot navigate the export space, which is slightly different from operating a business locally. There are a number of hurdles that you have to get around making sure that you comply with the various the technical requirements, product specifications, and in this particular instance, see issues related to SPS measures, but also just simply navigating the finances around exports, what can be expected, the logistics around it. So the export development program is meant to address that particular gap, so that as much as a business may be export ready, or rather, let's say it may be business ready, and have a product that are market ready, it doesn't necessarily that business is export ready. So the intervention is absolutely critical to ensure that there is a complementarity between your business readiness as a company, as well as your market readiness, and obviously completing that, as I said, as a last mile intervention, your export readiness, to make sure that you're able to understand the nitty-gritties that goes around being a successful exporter. And obviously we don't want to do it in a way that just simply capitalizes on the opportunity as and when you see it. I think the approach is, and the strategy has always been around making sure that you sustain your exports going into different countries. Okay. Then of course there are a range of things that we focus on as part and parcel of the export readiness of a company. So a number of programs that we run. One that you may be familiar with, and there's more information in the DTIC website, is the Global Exporter Passport Program. It's been running successfully for the last 5 years. So it takes you through different phases of exporting, very basics for companies that have never been in the export phase, about introduction to exporting, and then the second phase of it, once you've gone through the introduction to exporting, we do rope in companies. So these are not this is not standard presentation from the DTIC. It's actually services that have been commissioned by the DTIC from successful exporters, one, as well as experts in the export field itself, who would come in to work and support the different groups that will be participating in this Global Export Passport Program, to be able to take them through the different stages of exporting. So we do cover introduction to exporting. We cover strategies around planning for exports, which is again a critical intervention that, as I said, we've seen that many companies would fail at that level. And then the third phase of it is around market entry. So market entry, as opposed to market access, slightly different, right? In the sense that market access, broadly looks at your range of instruments that you use to access different. Market entry is really about breaking down the specific barriers that you see as you are trying to get your product into a country. It may also include some of the activities that you undertake around your marketing activities, your in-store promotion activities, your advertising, and all these kind of things. And then the last phase is also around mentoring and business coaching, which is really working with specific countries. And what we have been trying to do recently is work with some of our key strategic partners. So you can imagine if we in South Africa, we as a DTIC, specifically this particular program I'm talking to you about, we are a trade promoting organization. We're a business support organization which looks at specifically the needs of exporters. They are in our counterparts equally same type of institutions. So what we are trying to do is, structure programs with our counterpart institutions, wherein this aspect of mentoring and coaching is sort of located within that. In that way, you're not just getting coaching and business mentoring from the DTIC side or South African-based experts, but you're also getting, expertise and intervention from the target market experts, and they're able to take you through what are some of the strategies as well as the tactics that you can deploy to be able to get around market access challenges that you see in that country. And it tends to work much better than just having a theory-based approach to things. So really practically, if I want to access this specific sector and segment of the market in the agro-processing, what are the NTPs, and how can I, who are the networks that I can work with. And of course, as we do that, it's complemented by some of the trade missions that we undertake. Many of you, those that have been working with the DTIC, you probably previously would have participated in some of the international exhibitions that we run. Now, we call them trade missions for the simple reason that because they are targeted. The ones that we have been running successfully is what we call national pavilions, but I think Mr. Mabusela will talk specifically to others as well. I wanted to focus on the national pavilions one. The simple reason being that the national pavilions are really what we call your South African incorporated approach to targeting a market, to making sure that we are comprehensively present in a particular market. So we would then participate in this international exhibition through a form of a national pavilion, where within the pavilion itself you'll have a number of South African companies. Many of them would be exhibiting different sectors, but the idea really is to have a common place where international buyers can come to the pavilion itself and be able to go through the range of offerings as well as products that South Africa is wants to sell to the world. So I think that is one strategy that we deploy, and obviously because it is a service, it means that there is a certain compensation that the DIC takes care of, including obviously the flying of the samples as well as the flights to the different destinations, which will be taken care of by the DTIC. But of course, the biggest one being the ability to rent out space for you to be able to engage. And of course, that is complemented by what we would call your typical business missions, trade missions that we run. So we'll identify a number of countries, key and strategic countries, and obviously depending on the sector. In this particular case, we'll look at the countries that we're looking to campaign in as far as market access, market entry is concerned around agro-processing. And there are a couple that we have identified. So obviously, we also do undertake our own market intelligence as well as analysis to see where the trends are going. So there are countries that we know that we need to sustain our presence in those markets in terms of agro-processing. And there are countries that we know that we need to start campaigning for demand. If you look at countries like Japan, countries in the US, in the USA, South Korea, there are opportunities in India. There are opportunities within the various range of products in the agro-processing space where we're seeing that there is an increasing demand. And the question is whether or not, given the increasing demand, is there no opportunity for South Africa, SMEs as well as youth-owned companies, broadly speaking, to access those markets so that they can be the supplier of choice for some of those products. So we will target those kind of countries when we run those trade missions. And just to give an example, I think in the last 2 years alone, participated in over 60 international events of this nature, and these are big events. I think one of the critical things that I should mention is that it's not just about going to a country and exhibiting broadly, The idea here is that you want to participate in a trade fair and an exhibition where you know that the who's and who's from a buyer perspective, the people who have the buying power, I mean the big retailers, the big import agents are there. So we usually target those ones because that's where you want to concentrate your efforts in. To concentrate your efforts around events where you know that you have got a significant number of buyers that would obviously lead to you having increasing the chances of your trade opportunities, your trade leads, and obviously ultimately, which is really about that, it's about transacting. It's about the transactions that you're able to do. So over 60 events that you've participated in 2018, 2019, and based on the companies that we have supported, they've recorded close to an estimated about 4 billion rands export sales. Close to about 800 companies that we've been able to support to go into this market. So as I said, maybe as a summary, without necessarily taking too much time, I'll circle back on some of these points, obviously when we do the Q&A, and I'm looking forward to the specific Q&As that and the questions that you may have around agro-processing and some of the opportunities that we're seeing. Just to summarize, in terms of the offerings, I did mention some of the group offerings, the national pavilions, which is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the key interventions because it does project a South Africa Incorporated. So when we project the South Africa Incorporated, means we project the strength of the country in terms of a supplier in that industry. So it gives the international buyers the assurance that we do have capabilities in that sector. And obviously we talk about very dedicated country-specific missions where we undertake these outward selling missions through which you are able to also engage with the various buyers within specific countries and undertake, what we call business-to-business interactions and networking, obviously. And obviously, we also facilitate inward buying missions for certain sectors from certain countries where we know that there is an increased demand. So we'll organize ourselves and organize our respective suppliers and obviously bring on board international missions, buyer missions to come and buy. And obviously, as I said, some of the individual offerings, and I'm hopeful that Mr. Mabusela will cover on some of those. Primary export market research, I said, is very important. I think it's a key instrument that all SMEs ought to be familiar with. As I said, of course, most information you can always readily find over the internet, but I find that quite often it's important to do a deep dive in terms of the kind of research that is required for you to be able to base your export business plan onto targeting specific markets. So that's something that I would really encourage that different companies put in as a service, and obviously talk to us about it. Inward buying, as I said, into some of the individual offerings, in-store promotions that would undertake, that would be dedicated to, uniquely tailored to the specific, companies and the specific big retailers that they want to see their products being promoted in, and obviously the sector-specific assistance that obviously talk to the services that are rendered to the different companies, but through the different associations. You'll know that we work with the different industry association, and in this particular, we work with the Export Council. So there are these specific services that would render to the different companies through the different the Export Council and as well as association. I think, Chair, let me stop here. I really would be keen to entertain specific questions so that we can drill a little bit deeper and I'll offer more advice to the audience. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you for that. Very insightful as well. I agree with you that in terms of the flow, I think it would have best served the purpose and the session if you had Mr. Mabusela, but I think you've touched on a lot of the things that the audience are keen on. And judging by the number of questions that are already popping up on the chat box, it is clear that we're going to have a bumper-to-bumper session when we go through the Q&As. I'm going to ask that Mr. Mabusela come on, and then we can round it up and deal with the questions that the audience has. I mean, I can see that the chat box is quite active. In fact, I'm glad that some of you are even assisting with responding to some of the questions and some of the opportunities that are there. Thank you for that. Let's all help each other. I think that's what this is about. It's about lifting each other up as we rise, lift as we rise. So Mr. Mabusela, the platform is yours. Mr. Donald Mabusela is the director, strategic partnerships and customer care at the DTIC. Is going to take us through the offerings that the department has insofar as this industry is concerned, and link up some of those offerings with what Mr. Sinona spoke about, in order to ensure that we round it up nicely, and then we can deal with the Q&As. Mr. Mabusela, the platform is yours, and we'll then come back with Q&As, especially around issues that I see popping up a lot on the chat box pertaining to access to markets and things like that. So if Mr. Mabusela is ready, you can come on, and then we can then go through your presentation. And then what the audience has also asked for is if we can share the presentations that were delivered today. So where the presentations have been delivered in this fashion, we will ask that the DTIC team sends it to all the delegates. Thank you. I see you are on the screen. So it's your turn, Mr. Mabusela. I'll come back after your presentation. Thank you very much. I think your sound is failing us a bit. Yeah, we still can hear you. I think I'm going to ask that we try connect your audio, but I think it will have to happen from your side. So I'm going to ask that maybe we deal with some of the questions from that are directed at the two other speakers. I'm reluctant to delve too much into the questions that are related to the offerings that I know you're going to talk about, but I'll deal with those that I know that are not necessarily part of your presentation, and ask that both Mr. Molepo and Mr. Sinona help respond to those questions, whilst I also give a sense of, because I saw there's a question related to policy of cancer, because that's my day-to-day job. I'm going to assist with responding to some of those questions. In the meantime, can we ask technical to reconnect Mr. Mabusela? I think he has to go in and out so that he comes back with his audio connected. In the meantime, I'll deal with the questions. Apologies for that, Mr. Mabusela, and apologies to all our delegates who are looking forward to hearing what the offerings are, especially following those two presentations that we have gone through. The first question that I saw on the chat box was around that I thought we can respond to while I was waiting for Mr. Mabusela to come back. Was around from Tepo Motsamai. While there's a lot of opportunities in agriculture, so I just want to ask that if we don't know much about agriculture, is there going to be training or classes for people like him to study more? I mean, if this is a new industry to you, and I think Mr. Molepo, this is more along your alley. I mean, if it's an industry that one is not familiar with, and but they're interested, having gone through this presentation, they think it's it's worth exploring. Is it possible that they can attend some sort of training or classes that can help expose them to those products? I know that a lot of it has to come from yourself as an entrepreneur. You have to invest the time, but it will be helpful for Mr. Molepo to give a sense as to whether there are programs that people can access that can take them through some of those introductory phases. You touched on a lot of the industries, especially where there's opportunities to even export. I mean, you spoke about citrus as an example as the best performing one. If somebody wanted to go into citrus farming and end up as an exporter, is there any program, or is that what Mr. Mabusela is going to also touch on? Is there anything you can mention in that regard, Mr. Molepo?
Thank you very much, Chair, as well as Tepo for the question. I was also going through the chat box to see some of the questions, and I was even trying to answer most of them. The question regarding the venture into a new area where you don't have prior knowledge or experience. So the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, they've got the directorates that specifically focusing on, for example, the animal production. So if you are working on anything in the animal space that you want to establish yourself, so they've got normally they've got a production guides that will take you from the early stages, like what kind of the seeds, if you are, it's a plant, they've got a plant production, what kind of seeds, the varieties that are suitable to the environment of South Africa, what kind of production methods that you can use. So they've got those, and on top there are also the extension officers. For example, if you are situated in, I can say in Limpopo or KwaZulu-Natal, within that province, in a district municipality, there will be an extension officer that is taking care of that area. That person will also take you from scratch. But coming to agro-processing, we are also there because our role is industry development and competitiveness. We've got colleagues. We can also come to you and assist you in terms of putting together a prototype, so that at the end of the day, you actually follow and produce in a way that the markets will appreciate your product. And another one is as I mentioned, the industry associations. So the industry associations, they've got the transformation wing. Each and every industry, for example, if you are in a citrus space, you want to venture into citrus and you don't know how and when and to start. So we've got the Citrus Growers Association, which is it's an industry body that is responsible for citrus production in the country. They've got a transformation wing that is led by the transformation manager. The responsibility of the transformation manager is to ensure that they are bringing those previously marginalized group into the mainstream economy or in the mainstream value chain of that particular commodity. So they'll go with you. They've got a training that they arrange. Mostly they are free of charge. They will give you an overall research or studies that they've done, the feasibilities of the area, and more importantly, linking you up with the commercial businesses around your area. So those are the support in terms of the upcoming entrepreneurs. So we are available, and you can also drop me an email after the event. Then I can understand your venture much better, and then get a way of assisting you. And I know that there are a lot of support from various departments, from various agencies, from industry associations, the export councils. They are also there to assist you in terms of taking you through. But as the chair already alluded, that as an entrepreneur yourself, you also have to do an initial research and then prepare the business plan. So in that, when you approach us, you just say, from the desktop research that I did, I found that these are the methods that I can apply. These are the equipment that I will need, and then so that kind of initial research, it gives us a starting point where we can actually assist you. But we are available to assist you with that venture. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. But that's quite helpful. I saw a question as well from someone saying they have a QR code system. I mean, QR code is quite important if you want to, to move with the times, especially digitally. I mean, QR codes that can help link your products with GS1 codes, especially for retail purposes. I saw that someone has that option and they want to get in touch with Proudly South African, please, our email address, write to us, info@proudlysa.co.za, info@proudlysa.co.za, and what will help you with is an array of access to market linked opportunities. For us, it's about, as Proudly South African, I'm speaking as in my capacity as the head of Proudly South African. For us, it's about ensuring that if you have a consumer-facing product, we help get it to consumers. If you have a product that is targeted at the private sector, we help you get it there. And that if your product is directed at the public sector, especially if it's a designated item, we help ensure that government ultimately buys your product whenever they make those purchasing decisions. And so we are a buy local campaign as Proudly South African, and we focus all our efforts in making sure that we reclaim the market share that has been lost to imported items. So you remember on the slides that Mr. Molepo took us through, he showed you what is coming in and what we are sending out by way of export. So if you look at what is coming, the basket of imports, if you look at what is coming into the country, you will see that there's still substantially higher volumes than we would ideally want to see coming into the country, especially in industries like poultry and some of those industries where we know we have the capacity and can produce what we require. And so in that regard, we try and reclaim that share of the market that has been lost to imports for locally made products and services. And so talk to us, proudlysa.co.za. That is the biggest benefit, is that as we roll out programs that are aimed at educating consumers on the importance of buying local, you then benefit by association, especially if you're using the logo on your products, on your items. It helps consumers easily identify those products that they're being asked to buy whenever they make purchasing decisions. And so we ask that you contact us, info@proudlysa.co.za, as well as try and register for membership of Proudly South African so that you benefit from some of the programs that we roll out, in most instances jointly with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, as well as other government entities, as well as non-public sector entities that are sitting in the private sector, but that have offerings, both financial and non-financial, that can assist you. Mr. Mabusela is still trying to sort out his sound. So whilst we do that, we are going to take another question. There's a question, Mr. Sunona, that I think maybe you can touch on, which I don't think will probably be covered in the presentation by Mr. Mabusela, which is from Sankimo Mahata, who said, for the SA agriculture to have an impact on food security, the state needs to subsidize young farmers, as all EU countries do. We know they subsidize their companies for export purposes. Is that something that the country does? I know you touched on what we're doing, especially in the space of trade missions, what we do with setting up national pavilions. Outside of that, do you have a program that subsidizes young farmers for them to stay operational and to export if they need to? Mr. Simona?
Yeah, I'm with you. Thanks. I think it's a great question, and it touches on two things. On the one hand, it's a policy issue in terms of export subsidies, and then on the other hand, it's about international business strategy, as it were. So first, maybe for the first one, one of the disadvantages of being a globally integrated is obviously you have to work within certain multilateral frameworks, and in this particular instance, we obviously work within the framework of the WTO, which, in as far as agriculture is concerned, heavily discourages subsidies because they tend to obviously distort trade, internationally. And so, to the extent that the EU is obviously subsidizing some of its sectors, there's always been an outcry that those subsidies needs to be phased out. Because they do affect competition from other smaller players, as it were. But of course, there are other ways through which you can get around some of these multilateral agreements within, again, what is acceptable frameworks. So, for example, when we talk about subsidizing and or supporting the ability for small emerging markets, small emerging entrepreneurs or enterprises to market their companies, their products and fruits. That's within the rules, the global trade rules specifically. So the question is, what can we do to the extent that there is the products that are ready for the export market? How do we ensure that they reach different corners of the world so that there is, demand that one can talk about in specific countries that can be satisfied by those products. So there we can definitely come in as a way of compensating those marketing related costs that a company would naturally incur as a result of wanting to market their products outside of South Africa. But of course, within the country, I mean, we're talking about some of the broader topics around localization, incentives, as well as manufacturing competitiveness incentives. Again, it's tactics and strategy to see how best you can utilize those incentives to specifically target your business processes where obviously you want to ramp up efficiency and competitiveness. So I think it's a combination of using instruments without necessarily being seen to upset the broader frameworks within which we all hope every country should operate within for the benefit of obviously the global community. But would certainly be interested to see from a business case perspective, which may be a case by case issue, how we can really help the company to be much more export competitive, and obviously succeed globally in terms of the different export markets company. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that response. Appreciate it. There's a question from a colleague who says he's from Dumisani Hlangetwa from Durban, eThekwini Metro. And I think it can be best answered through conversation between Mr. Hlangetwa and Dr. Molepo there. If you can please assist, because I think his question is around the fact that they have a poultry farm that they've leased out as a metro to a group of co-ops, and a co-op made up of those who worked for RCL and were subsequently retrenched when the poultry farm suffered, mostly due to imports that were coming into the country, that they're producing broiler chickens up to 10K per cycle. But what I think his question is can the DTI assist with interventions to make sure that the farm remains fully operational, or refer them to potential entities that can assist? Dr. Molepo, I think, is that something that you can engage Mr. Hlangetwa on? And whilst we get you to respond to that, there's a specific question that was, I think you've touched on it a bit, but maybe we should. And I think when you referred to some of the programs that the Land Reform and Agriculture Department has, you touched on it a bit, but Gwen Foster wants to know, is one of the issues with preparing SMEs for market access and exports the fact that we are not preparing industry participants to meet the standards, things like record keeping and traceability. Traceability is very important, especially with all the health standards and requirements that have been put in place, especially if you think of industries like poultry, where there's regulations around how much you can inject brine and those kind of things. Are we assisting companies with those kind of technical expertise? And I think you've partly touched on it, but maybe let's respond to both. One from our colleague from eThekwini, as well as the one from Gwen Foster. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I can start with the last question, and then I'll do the first one afterward. In terms of assisting the SMMEs to comply, as you truly mentioned, the issue of traceability as well as compliance. I know that mostly when you are in agro-processing, you'll also likely to be active in primary agriculture. So there is a good agricultural practice. We call it GAP. So there is a SA GAP as well as the Euro GAP. So starting from there, so you need to comply with those good agricultural practices, and then you also comply when you are about to, let's say, after farm gate, when you are about to do the storage, the processing and the packaging. So there will be the hazard compliance. Each product is got its own ISO, as well as the SANS, the national standards that need to comply with the issue of traceability. So in a nutshell, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, they do have a directorate, they call it Agro-Processing Support, that is led by Dr. Timlisa. So the directorate, they support, they have a budget for compliance, where they group farmers that are operating in one area, also the processors that are in one area, they work with SABS. I think it's a fully funded. What they need from you is a commitment. So they take you through, they help you with the audits. At the end, they help you until you are actually ready or you comply with the particular standard. Because now for you to be able to service either formal domestic as well as the export markets, you need to be complying with those standards from production up until your product is ready. So throughout the value chain, you need to be working with each and every standard and compliance. And then I think our chairperson mentioned the issue about GS1, the barcoding system that you actually also need to have when you are about to access those markets. And again, the issue of the poultry producers. As we know that the poultry master plan is there to address those issues in terms of supporting the businesses that were affected by the influx of imports. They might be affected by the pandemic, or they might be affected by any natural cause. So we've got the agro-processing support scheme, which I know that the presentation that is coming, maybe they'll touch more on the agro-processing support scheme. Actually, it was part of my slides, but I took it out as I look at the agenda and I see that there will be the colleague from the Industrial Financing Division of the DTI that will be presenting. So those are the schemes that they will support you in terms of getting those equipments, knowing that if you will be participating at the commercial level, you'll be requiring specific equipment that are complying with what the markets need. So the incentive from DTI that is specifically on agro, and then I know that agriculture as well, they've got what you call a comprehensive agriculture support program. In a nutshell, it's CASP. So in CASP, they also focus on commodities and the animal production, which poultry falls under. It's one of the target industry that they are looking at. And also, you've got your Provincial Department of Agriculture in KwaZulu-Natal, Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal. They also have some support system that they can actually provide. But it's also important to reach out to us. I believe the organizers will share with you the slides. My email address is there. You can just forward an email to me, and then at the end, I'll be able to assist you regarding your inquiry. So at some stage, you'll need a one-on-one, so that at the end of the day, you'll be able to be assisted. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Before I see Mr. Mabusela is sorted, but before we go to him, I just want to touch on something that seems to be quite regular in terms of the questions that are coming up. Mr. Sinona, there's a question around any plans to have any national pavilions or any trade missions. We know that COVID has impacted a lot of the plans that had been put in place, especially during the past 2 years. But are there any plans to host any national pavilions, any trade missions, outward missions? Are there any inward missions that any of our delegates who are interested in those can participate in?
Yes, no, thanks very much. So for sure, we are working on that list. Maybe just for the benefit of the audience, I think in due course, in the course of this week or next week, you should be able to visit the DTIC website, and you'll see the list of the national pavilions that we're earmarking for both the remainder of this year as well as the remainder of next year. Obviously, this is happening within the context of COVID-19, so there's a lot of changes that we're witnessing, but we have taken a deliberate decision to participate in a hybrid format in most of these ones. So most of them would obviously be virtually, but just if I can share with the colleagues, those specifically talking to agro-processing, Make Fruit, which is one of the biggest shows that takes place around fresh fruits and vegetables. It takes place in Italy, and it will be later this year. We are making plans and preparations to participate in that. There is the Malaysia International Halal Show, the MIHAS, which is taking place in Malaysia, and I think there's an option to participate virtually in that one as well. So obviously for the companies that would like to exhibit there, we would obviously work with our local representation in Malaysia, but would also make sure that at least in terms of their marketing, digital marketing content, and their virtual participation, including potential B2B meetings, we'll want to be able to support them so that we maximize on the presence of the platform for South African halal producers. And then there is the food logistic. I think Asia, obviously, given the fact that the Asia region is one of the the hotspot in terms of our market development for agro-processing. So we'll obviously be making plans to participate in that later this year as well. There is Anuga, which is taking place in Germany. We're again making plans to participate in that as well. The bigger one, obviously, that is within the continent is the Intra-Africa Trade Affair, which is taking place in Rwanda. It is a multi-sectoral, but we obviously want to make sure that there is a big delegation of South African agro-processing and agro companies that will be taking to that, again, given the fact that primarily the African market is one of the major destination. In fact, the number one destination for agro-processing products. For want to make sure that we sustain that place by making sure that we connect with the various buyers and companies that are looking to source from South Africa. So that will be taking place later in the year as well. So and I think the call for application is already out. So companies that are interested in participating in that, again, most likely going to be hybrid because of the ever-changing circumstances that we're finding ourselves. I think one of the things that we have noticed about COVID-19 is that we've had to pivot the way we do things in some way. So I'm hoping that even the companies that are looking to participate in some of the national pavilions that we'll be undertaking later this year or in the near future are already also adjusting themselves, making sure that it's not only just about taking yourselves there, but it's also making sure that you have the necessary, digital marketing content that best introduces your products and approaches to the various international buyers. I think we won't have to do that, obviously, from the DTIC side. we'll see what kind of support we can lend and give to the companies to make sure that they are visible and their products are visible globally as well. Thanks.
Right. No, thank you for that. Now, for those of you who are interested in any of those opportunities, we will give out Mr. Sinona's details before we leave, all the details of the team that he works with, so that you can get assisted. But maybe let me, in the interest of time, bring in Mr. Donald Mabusela. We know you are sorted now, sir. For you to take us through your slides. Let's spend the next 10 minutes on your slides, and then try and reserve the rest of the time for questions, any direct questions that might come up. So I'm going to ask you to squeeze your presentation into a 10-minute session so that we have time to take up more questions. I see the questions are still coming in thick and fast. Mr. Mabusela, like I said, is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Customer Care, the GTIC. The platform is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to hop, skip, and jump over the presentation. It's a very long presentation, and I did it deliberately with the understanding that it will be shared with the participants, and it will provide most of the information they need. How do I move? Okay, so briefly, I'm going to talk about the background. Why do we have incentive programs, and what kind of programs are they? And briefly outline the branch of the DTI that is responsible for administering the incentive schemes. And I'll give a brief summary of the relevant incentive schemes and the process that should be followed when applying. And lastly, it will be the contract details. The main reason I have this slide here is to indicate that the many divisions and branches within the DTI, and we are responsible for industrial financing. Our branch is called industrial financing, and we work in partnership with other divisions of the DTI. As far as incentives are concerned, all in all, we have over 20 financial instruments that serve different purposes and support various organizations in different fields. But the key areas of our operation is manufacturing and agro-processing. So our incentive schemes support those agro-processing entrepreneurs who are involved in processing, not in primary agriculture. And then in a number of cases, people put in applications and they encounter problems because the key issue here is the viability of the project is important. It must be profitable, and you must be able to prove through your business case that the business is worth supporting. And also the issue of technical viability, whereby you indicate that there are capabilities within the organization to be able to process and produce the foods. And another key issue about our incentives that they are cost sharing. The DTI pays a portion and the applicant will pay balance. And of course, we do not pay upfront as the DTI, but we only reimburse after you shall spend your funds. But first of all, you get approval and then you spend and you put in a claim. And the kind of costs that we cover, the acquisition of factory buildings or the leasing thereof, the acquisition of machinery, tools and equipment, and we only support the acquisition of new machinery, new equipment, and new tools. And in certain instances, the issue of acquiring relevant technologies and issues of compliance, and also commercial vehicles. And the reason why the DTI introduced this kind of support measure is because our marketing, our manufacturing sector was sort of struggling, whereby people were using the old technologies And as a result, we're becoming more and more uncompetitive, more especially with cheaper imports that are coming from low-cost manufacturing countries. And to that effect, we work in partnership with various stakeholders to assist South Africans to access our incentive schemes. Our division, the Incentive Finance Division, is the one that designs various manufacturing support incentives, and we also implement them and also do monitoring and evaluate to see how successful we are supporting. This slide shows you an idea of the different clusters of our incentive programs. There are those that support innovation, those that support mainly investment in manufacturing, those that support services sector, improving competitiveness, and those that support investment in the relevant economic infrastructure. So for the purposes of this particular session, I've identified the following as the most relevant ones: the Technology and Human Resources or Industry Program, which assists with participants in the agro-processing sector when they look for new methods and new technologies. And with regards to this particular program, we encourage them to work with various institutions that are in the research space, like the CSIR and universities. Together with our industrialists, they look for new ways and means to improve their operations. The support program for industrial innovation, this one is when the industrialist is looking for new ways and means to improve the operations of their businesses and also to come up with new products and new technologies. With regards to the manufacturing cluster, we've got the Black Industrialist Scheme, which supports those enterprises whose majority ownership is in the hands of Black people. And there's also the Aquaculture one, whereby people in the agriculture space are assisted to set up facilities to artificially produce fish and related species. And there's also the Agro-Processing Support Scheme. After harvesting, whatever happens beyond that, we regard as agro-processing. So we've got a scheme here that assists with the acquisition of the relevant tools and the technologies that are needed by the agriculturalists. And with regards to competitiveness investment cluster, my colleague has already indicated with regards to the export marketing and investment assistance scheme, whereby we partly cover the costs of industrialists when they go out there to look for opportunities to export their products, and also the sector-specific assistance scheme. So these are the key programs that I've identified, and I'm of the view that they are relevant for this session. So what follows now, it's I've put a brief explanation of each one of them for the purposes of reference. And of course, I'm not going to go into much details, but you'll be able to see that with the support program for industrial innovation, the maximum support is 5 million. And then for large enterprises, we cover 50% of the cost. But for the small enterprises, we cover 50 up to 75% of the cost they need to set up their facilities. With technology and human resources for industry program, our support is to a maximum of 8 million, whereby the industrialists work in partnership with industry and also science and engineering research organizations to come up with new solutions, that they need in their operations. So those costs that they need to incur based on the approval, a maximum of 8 million will be paid by the DTI towards those costs. With the black industrialists, as I indicated, majority ownership, 51% of the company must be in the hands of black people. And our cost is the minimum of 30% up to 50%. And in rand terms, we'll contribute up to 50 million rand for investment capital and also feasibility studies or even post-investment support, and also for business development services. So the other slides, as I'm paging through, they explain exactly as to what we mean by the black industrialist, because we do not assist randomly. An enterprise must meet specific requirements, and these are criteria we use. It must have a valid BBB compliance certificate, and then the black industrialist, the black participant in those companies, must be involved in the day-to-day running and operations. And of course, these are for medium and large enterprises, which require a minimum of 30 million. And as to how much are we finally going to be subsidizing, is going to depend on the potential economic impact of the project. And this slide guides the applicants as to how do you compile those elements. And these slides indicate, as I said, our support is minimum 30% up to the maximum of 50%. Now we allocate points based on the potential economic impact and also how black people, how much are they participating in the organization. And of course, there are other costs that will not qualify or support, like salaries and wages. And with regards to the aquaculture, its main purpose here is to assist those entrepreneurs who want to engage in fish hatcheries, fish farming, crocodile farming, and so on and so on. And our funding is the maximum of 20 million rand. Cost sharing, the least we can support is 30%, and depending on a number of variables, we can go up to 50%. But in rand terms, it's 20 million rand for the acquisition of machinery, equipment and tools, for bulk infrastructure, for preparation of the land and the buildings, and also competitive related activities. So all those kind of costs will be calculated, and then we'll determine as to how much the DTI will subsidize. And we're saying if an enterprise is 100% black owned, then there's going to be additional support in terms of more funding that it will get. And of course, those enterprises that we support, they must be formal enterprises that are properly registered. We don't support non-formal enterprises. And of course, depending on participation by women, participation by young people, those are the elements that will assist the applicant to score more points, and those points will translate into more funds being provided. With agro-processing, we assist entrepreneurs in the food and beverage value chain, furniture manufacturing, fiber processing, feed production, fertilizer production, and so on and so on. And our funding is 30 up to 45%, depending on a number of variables. And in rand terms, our support can go up to 20 million rand for the applicants to acquire buildings, factories, new machinery, equipment, commercial vehicles, and related competitiveness improvement costs. And of course, the smaller the enterprise, the higher will be our support. And with medium to large enterprises, the percentage of the grant is reduced accordingly. And those that meet the economic benefit criteria, those that have got the potential to have higher impact on employment, on transformation, and in locating in those depressed industrial areas, they'll get additional points, which will assist in increasing the amount of grant which they'll qualify for. And then with regards to export marketing, we indicated that those that want to expand their markets beyond the borders of South Africa, financially, we assist them to participate in various programs such as exhibitions, going out there to do primary market research, also through missions. And sector-specific assistance when they are part of various organizations such as the export councils to qualify for assistance in one or another. And lastly, how do you apply? As you can see, there are many incentive programs. I cannot go into finer details to explain each one of them. So when you want to apply, first and foremost, you need to go to our website and then download the relevant guidelines for that particular incentive scheme and make sure you study it. And myself and my team are available to assist with interpretation and putting together the relevant application. And once we've received it, we'll do the basic evaluation to ensure that it meets the minimum requirements. And then the relevant officials will present the application to the education committee, which will make a decision. These are our contact details, DTI website, and the physical address. Now, because of COVID protocols, we are mostly working virtual. We've got the customer care center number there, and you're able to engage with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Mabusela. We finally made it. Mama, we made it. Appreciate the efforts made on your side to ensure that we can deliver this presentation. Regards to Pumla, who assisted in that regard. Can we use the last 6 minutes that we have? I'm not in a position to go through all the questions, but I know that the webinar platform is only available to us until 12 on the dot. So to avoid it cutting us, I'm going to propose that each of our speakers come back online. And do you use the 2 minutes to wrap up based on what you've seen on the chat box, those salient questions that you think are important for you to get through that will not necessarily be addressed by the presentations when you share them. Your details have been made available. Thank you. We still have on the screen Dr. Mabusela's details as well as those of the customer contact center, the DTIC. So contact him. Dr. Molepo has given his details on his presentation. And I assume that the DTIC contact center is the same one that will be utilized if you want to participate in any of the national pavilions and trade missions that Simona spoke about. So 2 minutes each. Let's start with you, Dr. Molepo. Please, let's keep to 2 minutes, otherwise the webinar will cut us before the rest of our colleagues have spoken. In exactly 120 seconds, salient points that you think you've picked up on the chat box that you think you need to address as we wrap up.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My final remarks is that agro-processing, it's one of the key important sector identified to create the jobs that the country is needing at the most. So to summarize the questions from the chat box, most questions are regarding the processes and the support system that the DTIC, its agencies, and other government departments are providing with regard to establishing the new businesses, more specifically the startups, and expanding the businesses. So, in a nutshell, if you you actually identified the industry that you want to participate on. The slides that will be shared will actually give you more or less the specific industry body that is working on. So most of those they are established, you go to their website, also check the information in terms of their transformation, know who's their transformation manager, and then work with them in terms of getting to be part of them. Also, reach out to the DTIC from the slides that was shared by Mr. Mabusela now with regard to the contact center, the email address that are coming there. We can also help you in terms of giving you more information, and also the most important is to understand what market needs. So one of the questions was also about opening up the markets, and I saw one question talking about the African free trade area that is it's actually giving businesses to access markets in Africa. So it's also important to also go through. I know that as a young people, you've got access to the internet, you are active on social medias, so you can actually go and look at, download the agreement, go through the agreement, see the offerings there in terms of the products, see the offerings there in terms of services. So that will also help you in identifying a specific area that is it's of your interest or it's niche in this regard. And then you come to us, we help you. But more importantly is do a desktop research. Just do a research. Before you come to engage with us, know exactly what you are looking for. Know the figures around the area, who are the players in the area. So do that research and come to us at least with something on the table. Then we can take it forward and help you going forward. Thank you very much, sir.
Perfect. Thank you for your contribution. Really appreciate it. And Tata Sinana, for you to wrap up, and Dada Molepo, child, 30 seconds of your time. So in 90 seconds, if you can.
No, that's fine. I think he sort of summarized for us in a sense. Yeah, but I think the last point that he made is absolutely critical if you're looking for the export market, primary market research. It is a service. It's there within the DTIC. It's when we talk about agro-processing, if we have to delve deeper in terms of the opportunities that we see happening. I know that the tendency to talk about the broader products that South Africa is already competitive in, but there are others, mangoes, guavas, avocados, pineapples, that there is global demand. So don't be constrained. Do your research in terms of what are the products that are in global demand, and obviously do approach the DTIC in terms of the services that would help and enable you to be much more export capacity. The last point on my side is that exporting is not for the faint-hearted. I will be honest with you. I think if you're really looking to get and venture into this particular industry, you need to have a business strategy that talks to export readiness. And again, we are available to assist in as far as export readiness and export development is concerned. Just to reach out to us, but do take it into account that it's not for chance taking. Even though the opportunity may be, you really need to be geared up to participate in it for a while. Thanks very much.
And I assume, I think I agree with you, it's not for the faint-hearted, but I assume that they can contact you through the contact center, 0861843384.
Yes, and of course there is the export help desk email as well that would direct and address all the questions related to exports.
Can you possibly type the email address on the chat box before we wrap up?
We'll do that. We'll do that.
Thank you very much for your contribution, and Tata Sinana, I appreciate it. Tata Mabusela, 1 minute, and then that's it. Exactly 1 minute, Tata Mabusela. You're still muted.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. As you can see, with incentives, there are many, and each one has got its own specific requirements. The presentation that I've shared provides an overview of each one of those. But now, for anyone to access any of these schemes, you need to download the guideline and read the finer details. We are available to assist you understand whatever you do not understand. Send us an email call us through the customer care center. They'll provide the information to us, and we'll be able to engage with you accordingly, because it's too much information and it's a little bit complex, but our responsibility is to assist you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Mabusela. I appreciate it. Your presentation will be shared with everyone. I think it's quite insightful. Dr. Sinona has posted export help desk at the dtic.gov.za. Please write to them. There's also a helpful comment from Robert Moody. Thank you very much, Robert, where people can find tools to help identify markets and duties, taxes, and rules and regulations around exports. We appreciate that you spend time with us today. It's a pity that we had anticipated that in 2 hours we'll have covered everything, but we will share the presentations, we'll share the slides, the contact details have been shared. Please make contact with the various divisions that have been mentioned, the agro-processing sector desk, the customer care center, as well as the export promotion unit within the DTIC. They will assist you. I'm from Pali, South Africa. It will be a disservice to the organization that I work for if I don't talk about the fact that people on the call, like Nigel and Terence, who are members of Pali, South Africa, have been able to also access some of the programs that we have, including Terence, who spoke about the fact that he's a beneficiary of the Black Industrialist Program. Those are examples of the fact that, the basket of offerings that are available in all these institutions are helpful to entrepreneurs who are willing to pay the price of entrepreneurship. It's not easy, it's hard, but we thank you for your time today. We encourage you to go out and research, as advised by our colleagues who spoke before me, and ensure that you make a success of your business. You help us grow the economy, you help us create much needed new jobs, and we help take this country to the next level. My name is Eustace Mashimbi. I'm from Pali, South Africa, and I've been your facilitator for today. Thank you very much.